So to get us in the right mindset, I'd now like to begin with a song that we all know and love, albeit probably not quite in this form. Can you hear it all right? Okay. So, Simon and Garfunkel, Sounds of Silence, Parvarim, Tzlilei Hasheket. And indeed, the Parvarim duo actually devoted an entire album to the music of Simon and Garfunkel. And as you can see from the album, from its cover, Yossi Huri and Nissi Menachem, its two members at the time, could not resist the temptation really to take on the roles of Paul and Art, who after all were just a few years older than them. Now, despite their name, which means suburbs, the Parvarim, first founded in 1960, were very much at the center of Israeli musical life at this time, and best known for their renditions of Israeli folk and Sephardic melodies. The Simon and Garfunkel songs were translated by none other than Ehud Manor, one of Israel's greatest songwriters. And this album hardly represents an isolated case. Indeed, the list of musicians involved in importing foreign songs into Hebrew reads like a who's who of the Israeli musical scene in its early decades, hence my title. Naomi Shemer, Yossi Banai, Mati Kaspi, Yehudit Ravitz, Arik Einstein, Yafa Yarkoni, Chaim Hefer, Chaim Moshe, and the list could go on and on. The same goes for the range of cultures involved, which is truly international in scope, encompassing American, British, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Greek, Turkish, and Middle Eastern, as well as for the genres represented. So, for example, Naomi Shemer created O Mana'ehu Haboker, based off the musical Oklahoma's signature Oh What a Beautiful Morning. The country that refused to let the Beatles come perform happily translated many of their greatest hits into Hebrew. So, Rocket Mole for Only Yesterday, Hey Jude becoming Hey Root, and so forth. And the great Israeli actor, singer, and dramatist Yossi Banai, of the famous entertainer Banai family, faced with the dilemma of whether to try to be the Israeli Georges Brassens or Jacques Brel, opted for both. So we have musical theater, rock and roll, and the French chanson all amply represented. Here, in fact, is a clip of Brassens singing his scurrilous gorille. I apologize, but it's hard to find Brassens that isn't scurrilous.
C'est à travers de larges grilles que les femelles du canton contemplaient un puissant gorille, sans souci du qu'en dira-t-on. Avec impudeur, c'est comme mère, lorgnait même un endroit précis que rigoureusement ma mère m'a défendu de nommer ici. Car au gorille,
or in Banai's treatment thereof, and where you check, this always comes in really loud, so be sorry. Supposed to be there, Jack, for that.
עמד הגורילה בכלא, גורילה צעיר וחזק, וכל האנשים שבפלק חמדו את גופו המצק, ברטט הביטו הם פנימה, ישר באותו הדבר, שלפי מצוותיה של אמא, את שמו לא אוכל כאן לומר. ציירו את הגורילה.
Or in a very different vein, יש לי ארץ טרופית יפה. I have a beautiful tropical country, a big hit in Israel in the late 70s, reproduced the popular Brazilian musician Jorge Ben's País Tropical from nearly a decade earlier. Here first is the Israeli version. And I mentioned them before. Here you have Mati Kaspi, who was responsible for the whole project, and over here you have Yehudit Ravitz, who later performed the song on her own.
Share
for comparison, here the original in Portuguese. So in Portuguese.
Moro num país tropical, abençoado por Deus e bonito por natureza.
Que beleza!
Em fevereiro tem carnaval. Eu tenho um fusca e um violão, sou flamengo, tenho uma nega chamada Teresa.
All right, so that was just to give you a sense of some of the different kinds of genres, songs, contexts represented in the phenomenon that I'm describing. But how do we explain the prominence of this phenomenon, and what can it teach us about Israeli culture writ large? Whereas the first part of my title inquires as to the fate and fortune of these songs in Hebrew garb, its second part suggests that far from getting lost, a good many of them actually became deeply rooted in modern Israel and played a key role in the development of the country's musical culture. In order to understand how this happened, we need first of all to consider the paradox at the root of all translation activity. You translate because you need, or at least perceive, that you need stuff. Your own linguistic culture is too restrictive, or other stuff out there is so great that you need to have it. So translation emerges out of a position of, at least perceived, weakness or inferiority, but at the same time testifies to your culture's strength, your openness to the foreign, and your confidence in your ability to domesticate it. In the case of Israel, and with regard to music, the very neediness of Hebrew, as after all the parochial language of a new, small country, redounded to its great benefit, transforming it into a cosmopolitan language capable of handling folk, rock, samba, chanson, rap, etc. As such, this translation phenomenon both reflects and represented a test for the young state's Hebrew ideology, simultaneously strengthening the national culture and internationalizing it. And thus the smaller, more parochial place, Israel, actually becomes more cosmopolitan, I think one could argue, because of its need to take in, absorb outside influences, than, say, a big, in theory, cosmopolitan place, say, like this country. While the very act of translating a song from one language into another inevitably changes it, and so, for example, while País Tropical explicitly celebrates Brazil, I think there's some ambiguity in the case of Yeshli Eretz Tropik Yafa. Are we still talking about Brazil? El Al did, after all, help fund the album in the hopes of encouraging Israeli tourism to Latin America, or might the tropical country, in a kind of fantastical notion, the tropical country fondled by the sun, in a kind of fantastical notion, in fact, be Israel? So despite that, many, if not most, of the songs were translated more or less literally into Hebrew, and so there is little explicit translation as rewriting, to evoke the translation scholar André Lefebvre's helpful notion. Much richer, however, are the cases in which overt changes were made, leading to songs that frequently differ in fundamental ways, and such instances will be the focus of my talk today. Thus, Chava Alberstein, on a children's album, sings about a submarine that instead of being yellow is now Sabarit, the Sabra submarine. Thus the Beatles' utopian fantasy, so we sailed up to the sun till we found a sea of green, and we lived beneath the waves in our yellow submarine, is thoroughly domesticated as native Israeli. Never mind that the Sabra plant originally comes from Baja California, that's another story. The Israeli version of You're 16, You're Beautiful, You're Mine, translated by Chaim Hefer, opens with explicit reference to its source, Shamati Pam Shir Amerikai, V'hu me'od matim gam lach v'gam li, V'hu chozer kmo chalom leil kaitz, at bat 16, at yafa v'at sheli. I once heard an American song, and it's very appropriate, it's perfect for both you and for me. And its refrain is like a summer night's dream. You're 16, you're beautiful, and you're mine. Thank you, Michael Kaftor, wherever you are, yes, for the reference. What's been fun about this topic is you tell people that this is what you're working on, and people constantly have make you aware of all kinds of songs that you didn't know of. And also it's been a lot of fun. I've learned by studying Israeli music these last months, I've learned so much about the international music scene that I never knew before. So it really sort of works in both directions. A lot of fun. A particularly fascinating and ironic example, also the earliest of which I'm aware, in which the translation really takes the song in a different direction, concerns the song Mechorati, Land of My Birth, written by the Russian-born linguist and translator Yitzhak Yona Livni, shortly after making Aliyah in 1911, and dedicated to features of the Palestinian landscape. The work quickly became popular and was known in many places in the diaspora as a song of the land of Israel, in one case as a song of the Shomrim, guards of Eretz Yisrael. In a Russian ethnographic work, it was even described as a Palestinian Arab shepherd song, suggesting that a version of it had even crossed ethnic and religious lines. But it's quite surprising that a Russian book would refer to it in this way, as the song is actually a 19th century Russian poem by Alexei Konstantinovich Tolstoy, no relation to Leo, adapted to its new Palestinian context and making use of the very same melody. So if we compare the two, the beating hoofs of horses replaced by the crash of waves in the sea, the meadows and steppe by mountain and desert. So as Livni arrives in Palestine, he models his new homeland after his original one, or if you prefer, uses praise of the homeland that never was truly his as the template for when he finally does acquire one. And he does it so successfully that the song comes solely to be associated with its second home, so to speak. We'll now hear a beautiful 1968 rendition by the famous Israeli singer and one of the heroes, as you'll soon realize, of today's program, Yehoram Gaon. He actually also sang the Israeli. He also recorded the Israeli Year 16, but I'm not going to play that song today. Sorry, Michael.
נוף מולדתי שעון גלים בים וצל הרים סביב סביב כל פנים בבהר האח מולדת מולדתי חורשת כהנים נהמה וכל חליל בחצות הליל מדבר הרים לרוח.
I love that song. Just a beautiful minute and a half.
Is it supposed to be a Hallel or a line? He said Hallel.
הלל
Hallel. Kol Chalil Bachatzot.
No, Hallel.
Hallel is you praise somebody. Say Hallel.
no,
Line. I know what he means. I'm a native speaker of Hebrew, but I think it's supposed to be.
להלל וגם יוד
No, I think it's
All right. We'll hold the grammatical arguments for later, but happy to discuss. Everything is fair game.
There has never been an international lawsuit for piracy of all this copying and plagiarizing.
Okay, I anticipated that this would come, and I'm really glad that we have in our presence a renowned scholar of intellectual copyright. So I'll just say, I'm really not an expert on this. People have asked me that question. The thing is that in international context, until fairly recently, and you correct me if I'm wrong, there really was not a whole lot of oversight, and it often depended if the particular countries involved had actual treaties concerning this.
Yes.
So, for example, in one case, I actually read about Israeli songwriters deciding that it's better to work with Turkish material than Greek material. The musical traditions are actually quite similar because Greece and Israel at the time actually had a bilateral treaty governing copyright restriction, intellectual property, whereas Israel and Turkey did not. So you could steal whatever you wanted to from Turkey, and tons was ripped off from Turkey, but it was harder from Greece. Though, of course, plenty of Greek material, we actually, Uri pointed me to actually a website that lists literally dozens and dozens of Israeli songs that are based on well-known Greek melodies. So there's plenty of debt to the Greek musical tradition as well. But anyway, yeah, it's a good question.
Some of the more recent ones, it's possible were licensed. We don't know.
Yes, that as well. That as well.
Today's problem with the Eurovision
All right, but I'm going to move forward here. If Mechorati successfully translates its model in both the linguistic and locational senses to its new home, I wish to argue that in Leah Goldberg's rendering of a German poem that became a song, we can speak of a linguistic homecoming of sorts. The song, initially at least, Heinrich Heine's Gruß, or greeting, in German, Manginat HaTohar, or Shir Aviv, Song of Purity, Melody of Purity, or Song of Spring, in Hebrew, can be regarded as a long-running internal German-Jewish dialogue. The German poem was written, said already, by Heinrich Heine, early in the 19th century, set to music by Felix Mendelssohn, two Germans with deep Jewish roots. And Leah Goldberg, born in Königsberg and having studied in Berlin and Bonn, was herself deeply immersed in the German tradition. And it's striking to imagine her translating Heine in Palestine in 1941, of all years. The song is especially associated with the well-known Israeli singer Esther Ofarim, who also came to fame in Germany, where she lived for a time in the 1960s. In a moment, we'll hear a live 1998 recording of it by her in both German and Hebrew that took place in Hamburg. More recently, the song was featured in the final credits of the 2004 Israeli film Lalechet al Hamayim, Walk on Water, as a kind of hymn to the German-Jewish synthesis and as a kind of culmination to the film's proposed resolution of the vexed German-Israeli relationship. Highly recommend the film if you haven't seen it. While Goldberg's rendering is faithful to the overall course of the poem, she makes a number of subtle adjustments which serve to intensify it and render more vivid its longing. Thus, Klinge, ring out, is exchanged for Ufa, fly forth. Heine's Little Spring Song, Kleines Frühlingslied, becomes Goldberg's Shir Aviv Choshi, a free spring song. And the expanse drenched in gold, Merchav Stuf Zohar, replaces far and wide, hinaus ins Weite. I want in particular, however, to highlight and linger upon the exchange of Manginat HaTohar, Song or Melody of Purity, which of course provides one of the titles for Goldberg's variant, for Liebliches Geläute, sweet ringing sound. Heine's poem is already self-referential. It is the spring song it describes, and this applies as well to Goldberg's variant. As such, I would suggest that the purity mentioned here refers to the fact that what had been a product of German-Jewish hybridity has now been brought home as a purely Hebraic creation, and this from a poet, this carried out by a poet who had once in fact declared, writing, and I quote, "Writing in a different language than Hebrew is the same to me as not writing at all." So I'm suggesting that this poem that had sort of wandered around in the German-Jewish hybrid universe, Leah Goldberg in a sense brings it home, domesticates it by rendering it in Hebrew, and marks that by describing it implicitly as Manginat HaTohar, as a melody or song of purity. And now that promised recording by Esther Ofarim, first in German and then in Hebrew.
Leise zieht durch mein Gemüt liebliches Geläute, klinge kleines Frühlingslied, kling hinaus ins Weite. Zieh hinaus bis an das Haus, wo die Veilchen sprießen, wenn du eine Rose schaust, sag ich, lass sie grüßen. At zoremet benafshi, Manginat HaTohar, Shir Aviv Chofshi, Emek HaShtuf Zohar.
if I am right about Manginata Tohar, and maybe I'm not, but if I am, then this suggests that Goldberg's poem and the song can only fully be appreciated against the backdrop of the original version. And this leads me to the heart of my focus for today, on a particular form or subset of translation, on a metaphoric conception of translation in which one song directly inspires what is in essence a new song, perhaps even a better song, but in any case a very different song, though one still in some deep way dependent upon, linked in its genesis to the original. Here there is as much inspiration as translation, though both are typically present, and therefore I propose to refer to this phenomenon as transpiration. My apologies to any biologists present for whom this term refers to more or less to the evaporation of water from plant leaves, but this phenomenon of what I want to call transpiration is by no means restricted to the Israeli case, of course, and indeed to give you a good sense of what I have in mind, I'd like to open with an Anglo-American example, namely the relationship between God Save the King, or, as it has been for quite a while now, Queen, the national anthem of the United Kingdom, and My Country, 'Tis of Thee, which had often functioned as the de facto anthem of the United States prior to the official adoption of the Star-Spangled Banner back in 1931. On one hand, same song, same melody, same patriotic content, yet very different meaning, and a meaning in the second case that depends in part upon the earlier song, upon its source. So while the original petitions rather distantly, if repeatedly, on behalf of the monarch, the new song places the individual citizens belonging to the state up front and center. My country, of thee I sing. In short, Let Freedom Ring, I wish to suggest, rings all the more powerfully when you know that it replaces God Save the Queen. There are numerous examples of transpiration in the Israeli musical context. Kesheyavo Shalom, When Peace Will Come, again composed by Chaim Hefer from 1968, sung to When the Saints Go Marching In, whose various verses anticipate train rides to Damascus, ski trips to Lebanon, raised glasses in Cairo, and in conclusion, all of us singing together. Or the hit song, Egyptian song, Zamma Yadunya, that gave rise to the Israeli Arab Samir Shukri's popular song Rona Shali Rona in 1986. And here, in the Egyptian song, amidst the crowds of the world, it's difficult to meet up with one's lover, reimagined in the Israeli case as a father thinking constantly of the daughter that he can't wait to get back to. Or Zahava Ben's Tipat Mazal from 1992, A Bit of Luck, based on the Turkish song of Orhan Gencebay's Dil Yarasi. And the Turkish original is a song about the aftermath of a failed romantic relationship, and its Turkish name means speech wounds. And this is reimagined in Zahava Ben's song as a downtrodden individual wishing for just a little bit of luck, tipat mazal, but through basically the power of speech to sort of turn one's life around. So there's a kind of inversion in the role of speech, from being something that wounds to being something that can actually restore or turn around life. But what I wish to do, there are many more examples one could give. What I wish to do in the remainder of my time is to focus on 3 cases in which a foreign song directly inspires a related but largely counter-Israeli song that performs and promotes Israeliness through the implicit negation of the source song. While it is of course entirely possible to enjoy and find meaning in each newer Israeli song without knowing the original, and most listeners in many cases have done that, I argue that the encounter with the source song heightens the appreciation thereof, and thus that transpiration, again as I'm calling it, as a phenomenon, is worthy of close attention. We begin with Merle Travis's 16 Tons, the classic song bewailing the travails of the working man, so indebted that he can't afford to die. It was most famously sung, as we'll hear here, by Tennessee Ernie Ford in 1955, whose recording thereof sold over 20 million copies. He could afford to die, I think.
People say a man is made out of mud.
A poor man's made out of muscle and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Maybe we'll hear one more.
I was born one morning in the sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons, the number 9 coal. And the stall boss said, well, bless my soul, you load 16 tons. What do you get?
All right, you get the idea. And you know where to find it if you want to hear the rest. The success of 16 tons directly inspired its 1958 Israeli counterpart, 12 ton, that offers a very different perspective on what it means to be a worker. It was the product of the famous songwriting duo Yechiel Mohar and Sasha Argov, who wrote many, many songs together. Mohar was the lyricist, Sasha Argov wrote the melodies, and performed by Lekat HaNachal, the premier army entertainment troupe. Why the move from 16 to 12? Well, 12 is a much more resonant number in Jewish tradition, evocative of wholeness and completion, as in the 12 tribes. And indeed, at one point in the song, the singers refer to themselves as the 12th of the tribes. In the chorus, 12 tons is presented as the dream of every kibbutz and the most exalted of prophecies. And if you want to improve your Hebrew vegetable vocabulary, this is your song.
אנחנו הורדנו ביום ראשון 12 טון של עגבניות בפעם ראשונה ב2000 שנות משכנו בגזר 12 טון ו12 טון של פיבל וצנון 12 טון מלח על הפצעים של משתי הסביבה המתפקעים ו12 טון ועוד שקית כלומר 12 טון של שעועית ו12 טון המוצר הראשון ומכל עץ זית 12 טון אין 12 טון כן 12 טון זה חלום כל משק בשיא החזון 12 טון לא חשוב של מה חסר ולבסר תפוח אדמה.
Okay, it goes on and on. It's lots of fun. Since we have a scholar of Israeli dance present, I will show you, I don't always show this, but especially for you, I will show this little clip down here. Sorry, it's so small. So you see, this is the Nachal troupe actually performing this, and the women are all just clothed in vegetables. Okay, so you get the idea there also.
Just, you mentioned, I don't know who your scholar is here, but I'm an Israeli dancer of 50 years, and we do a dance to the original 16 tones.
Oh, okay, interesting. All right, so the celebration of work in 12 ton is certainly in keeping with the socialist kibbutz values so celebrated in the Israel of the 1950s. Nonetheless, I would say that the celebration of work in this song, which is taken to really ridiculous lengths as the song continues, makes even better sense when placed against the backdrop of 16 tons. In short, is hard work the worst thing possible or the best? On the relationship between these respective lyrics, you see here, you load 16 tons, what do you get another day deeper in debt? St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go, I owe my soul to the company store, versus, hey, 12 tons? Yes, 12 tons. It's the dream of every enterprise, of every kibbutz, and the supreme vision. 12 tons, it doesn't matter of what, lettuce, kalabasa, kind of squash, potato. So what in 16 tons is a kind of cynical question. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Well, nothing. In 12 ton is a kind of very positive response. 12 tons? Yes, 12 tons. In the original song, you have this reference to St. Peter, who is basically can't do anything, matched by this evocation of prophecy in the other hand. And what in the you have the company store in the original, to which the worker is basically has sold his soul, and that's matched in the counterpart by the kibbutz, which of course is collectively owned by all the workers. In 16 tons, it doesn't matter what you do, you're screwed anyway. In 12 tons, it doesn't matter what you harvest, it's all great. But most essentially, you have basically an individualistic, pessimistic orientation matched with a collective emphasis on optimism and joy. And here you see this very nicely if we compare two verses from the songs. It's all I, me versus the boss, whereas as opposed to we, and what we do will be written about in the paper. So a kind of celebration of the larger community and of the place of this particular collective in the context of the larger collective. A musical comparison between the two is also illuminating. First of all, there is the stark contrast between the minor of 16 tons versus the major of 12 ton, but also the fact that the highest note in the chorus of, let's go back to the chorus, of 16 tons falls on the word O. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul. That's the highest. And that ascent as you go through, St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I'm in the other song, but you know what I mean. As it goes up, peaking at O, it ironically subverts the notion of actually ascending, going up to heaven. Whereas in 12 ton, the highest note of the chorus falls on the word halom, dream. And the whole chorus is also comprised of matching pairs of notes that emphasize social solidarity. So at the very end, 12 tons, it doesn't matter of what, lettuce, calabaza, potato. The first part, 12 ton, shel chashuv, lo chashuv, shel ma, it's basically C, D, E going up, chasla kalabasa, tapuach adama, E, D, C going back. You can almost hear the kibbutzniks loading and unloading the vegetables that they're harvesting. Okay, I think you get the idea on this one. Moving along to the next song. It's really the most famous instance of in the Israeli context of what I'm calling transpiration, one which I imagine will not be really news to many, if not most of you here. And that concerns Naomi Shemer's Lu Yehi from 1973, song closely associated with the Yom Kippur War, most famously performed by Chava Alverstein, and its relationship with the Beatles' Let It Be from 1970. We'll come to the respective texts and music in a moment, but already the two titles are revealing. Lu Yehi is not an exact translation of Let It Be, meaning something more like if only it would be, whereas Let It Be would be more like Sheyihyeh. But Lu Yehi works wonders as an oral approximation of the original song, of the origin song. Let It Be, Lu Yehi. In both cases, 3 syllables and a very similar rhythm. As for the songs themselves, I'm going to stay here. Let It Be is primarily a personal song. When I find myself in times of trouble, it begins. And one of the interesting things for me that I learned in preparing this is actually that Mother Mary is actually Mother Mary. Paul McCartney's mother was named Mary, and she died when he was a young child. And the song is inspired by a vision that he had, a dream he had during a difficult period, where his mother came to speak to him in a dream and said, "Let it be."
I think he was thinking about the mother in the church, Mother Mary.
Well, that's the genius of the song, is that it works that way, but it wasn't actually it's not actually the origin of the song. In any case, and the final verse is also, and when the night is clouded, there is still a light that shines on me. It's really a very personal orientation. And even the middle verse, and when the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there's no actual collective. These are not people who belong together in any kind of collective. They're discrete, individual, broken-hearted people. No sense in which the narrator is directly connected with them. By contrast, Lu Yehi is repeatedly marked as belonging to and concerned with a specific collective. Holiday candles, the shofar, messengers at the door bringing unfortunate wartime news, petition to allow soldiers to return home safely, and of course the collective nature of the petition itself in the song, Kol shenevakesh, Lu Yehi, all that we request, an emphasis on what the collective seeks and desires. the one place in which the speaker, and it occurs hesitantly, offers individual words, if only there can be heard within all this one prayer from my lips also, immediately thereafter it's made clear that the wish is a collective one. All that we seek, may it be. The individual steps aside from the collective, but very quickly is back inside it. So a perfect joining here of the personal and collective. So to sum up, let it be mostly personal, quite vague in terms of what it seeks. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be, there will be an answer. As such, it works for anybody, wherever you are, whatever your circumstances, whereas Lu Yi, much more collective and specific in terms of its wishes. A song for a particular society facing a particular collective challenge. With regard to the music, I'll play a portion of each song briefly in a moment, but while the melodies are quite similar, a key contrast is that Lu Yi is minor, whereas Let It Be is major. So it's the opposite of what we had before, where 16 tons was minor and Demonstrate tone was major. Here now, the foreign song is major, the Israeli variant thereof minor. And indeed, during the writing of the song, it seems that initially Naomi Shemer actually planned to simply use the Beatles' melody. But her husband at the time, so her second husband, Mordechai Shevitz, a poet in his own right, had just returned from reserve military duty while she was in the course of writing the song, and he declared, "I will not let you waste this song on the tune of strangers. This is about a Jewish war, and you must write a Jewish melody," prompting the subtle but unmistakable shift that takes place. And now I'll play just a few moments. I imagine we're all familiar with these songs, so we won't linger on them, but just so you hear that contrast.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. When all the broken hearted.
Okay. Sorry, I know, but all you broken-hearted people here, there will be an answer after the lecture is done. So and now a little bit of Lu Yi. And I really apologize, I only have it in English for you, but so be it.
יש מפרש לבן באופק מול ענן שחור כבד, כל שנבקש לו יהי. ובחלונות הערב אור נרות החג רועד, כל שנבקש לו יהי. בדלת תן מילה טובה בפיו, כל שנבקש לו יהי. אם נפשך למות שואלת מפריחה ומאסיף, כל שנבקש לו יהי.
Okay, what can we do? All right, for our final pair, I'm actually going to play the songs first, and then we'll talk about them. So we'll start with Arlo Guthrie, City of New Orleans, 1972.
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning mail. 15 cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors yards full of old black men and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done.
All right, so hard to stop these songs, but there's really no choice. And now, Shalom Lach Eretz Nehederet. Hello, shalom to you, wonderful land, wonderful country. And this again from Yoram Gaon, who we heard in the Mechorati before, and who incidentally also was in the Kata Nachal, the Army, the Nachal Entertainment Brigade, when they performed Shtem Esrei Ton. So he really is the hero of this presentation.
הייתי בפריז וגם ברומא, ראיתי את שירת פלאי תבל, בקוטב הצפוני וגם דרומה, אך אין מקום כמו ארץ ישראל. וכמו דמויות של נוף יפות, תמונות בזיכרוני עפות, כמו בעד עדשה של מצלמה, ותרמילי אותה נסע לכל מקום, לכל מסע, כדי פסיפס מתוך תמונה שלמה. שלום לך ארץ נהדרת, עבדך דן נושא לך שיר מזמור, גם אם לעתים נודד אני על דרך, בטוב לנדוד אך טוב יותר לחזור. צריכי המגדלים בירושלים, בסמטאות השוק הצבעוני, גגות הרעבים של גבעתיים, הניבטים מבעד חלוני.
Okay, I wanted you to hear Jerusalem mentioned, Yerushalayim, which comes really at the center of the song, but we have to move on. So first off, we compare, well, before we even compare the respective choruses, just the tempo of the songs really sort of reveals the key difference. The sort of languid, tired, plodding aspect of City of New Orleans versus the very energetic, really sort of hyper energy of Shalom Lach Eretz Nehederet. And then to the chorus of each song, in the first case, Good morning America, how are you? Incidentally, another interesting thing I learned in preparing this, that this was the inspiration for the TV show Good Morning America, this song, which I had never known. In any case, Good morning America, how are you? Don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done. Versus, hello to you, wonderful country. Your poor servant raises up to you a song of praise. Even if I sometimes wander on my way, it's good to wander, but better to return. So, in the first song, you have the narrator concerned, worried that he has been forgotten by his country. In the second, the narrator reminds the country that he has not forgotten her. So in the City of New Orleans, you have this sense of anonymity really throughout the song. Passing trains that have no names, freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. And then later, but all the towns and people seem to fade into a bad dream. And ultimately, really towards the close, the song reveals itself as a paean to the decline of the railroad in America. This train's got the disappearing railroad blues, followed by Good night, America, how are you? So what's more American, or what was more American than the railroad, than the train, you could say? In this song from 1971, it's at the time when passenger railroad service is basically collapsing, just before the founding of Amtrak in the United States. But of course, I'm a train lover, so I linger on that. But of course, this is a metaphor for the wider state sentiment in the country, in which many feel forgotten, left behind. And there's a strong sense of linearity in the song. The song is about this one specific trip. We are en route from Chicago down to New Orleans over the course of a day. And so the sense of night falling at the end really brings a sort of sense of pessimism to the song. in the corresponding case, in Shalom Lach Eretz Nehederet, instead of a single trip reported in the song, it evokes all possible travels, wanderings around the world. Where do I have it? Yes. Wanderings around the world and throughout Israel. Worth noting that Jerusalem is the first Israeli site mentioned and comes at the very center of the song, as I noted. So in contrast to the linear quality, the single trip in the first song, there's a kind of circular aspect, a wandering aspect to the second song with Israel and then Jerusalem right at the center. There's a fantastical nature to this travel. Maybe our singer, maybe our narrator has been to Paris and to Rome, but he certainly hasn't seen the 7 wonders of the world, because they don't exist anymore, at least not the majority of them, and I highly doubt he has been to the North Pole or to the South Pole. So this is all, it's all fantastic metaphorical presentation. The concern is there's this implicit danger that the singer might forget Israel, tempted by all the goodies in the world, and the singer is very quick to reaffirm his loyalty and is so self-deprecating vis-a-vis the land. Of Dechadal, your poor servant, who am I compared to you? This, of course, is an idealized I, an I who sings for an entire collective. And so just as in Shtemes Ton and Lu Yehi responds to a Western source song by articulating a vision of a collective Israeli identity. And that's really closing that sort of section, these 3 pairs of transpirations. And now to conclude the presentation as a whole, I'm going to sort of step back a little bit to the larger question of translation of foreign songs into Hebrew. So while there has been a decline in recent decades in the frequency, or at least prominence, of such translation activity, at least that's my sense, but I welcome thoughts from you on this front. Perhaps that's erroneous, but that's my strong sense. Compared to how just frequent and how vast the corpus is in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, my sense is that while it's still happening, there's much less of a tendency to actually translate foreign songs into Hebrew today. Nonetheless, the interest in importing outside musical influences continues unabated and perhaps has been even enhanced. And I'm, of course, thinking of the greater openness in Israel, or at least elite Israel, to music from the Middle East that began in the 90s. Of course, down low, on lower levels of society, there had been this interest among those Israelis who would come from Arab-speaking countries, but it was not recognized on elite levels really until the 1990s. And that openness, in conjunction with sort of the rise of world music, really sort of created an opportunity for the music of the Middle East to really become a part of this story. And I would also suggest, really thinking very contemporarily now, I would suggest that it is a recent music video that has most powerfully thematized translation in a song in both its spatial and semantic dimensions, as well as captured in visual terms, as well as having captured in visual terms the importation or the penetration of outside influences. And I'm here thinking of Static and Ben El Tavori's Tudu Bom from 2017. And I'm going to show you in a second just an opening of the video. And this is a little bit experimental on my part, but I figured, having watched this video and heard the song every day for months because my daughters were constantly playing it, this is sort of my one chance to actually sort of take something from that home musical scene and put it in a university talk. And I'm not going to let that opportunity go by. While, of course, not itself a rendering of a Brazilian song, Tudo Bom is not a translation of a Brazilian song, of a Brazilian Portuguese song into Hebrew. Translation practice is inscribed at the song's heart, both in terms of the importation of a Brazilian carnival aspect to Tel Aviv. Carnaval Polk, Moba São Paulo, it comes at the beginning of the song. It's carnival here, just like in Sao Paulo. And the central phrase of the chorus, Etzlenu omrim shebeseder, ve'etzlam omrim shetudu bom, when we say it's okay, they say tudu bom. What we say in Israel, what they say in Brazil. This is but one of the many phrases in Brazilian Portuguese that have made their way into the song, which also contains quite a sophisticated and hilarious interlinguistic pun in the phrase Hilo mitzafat estegiri li ech achadli et a corazon, or croissant, playing on corazon and croissant. She's not from France, so tell me, how did she eat my croissant heart? Most especially, though, this is really why I want, the video opens, as you're about to see, with a rocket penetrating Israeli airspace. Iron Dome missed this one, but that's for the best, bringing with it the musical atmosphere of Brazilian carnival to the heart of Tel Aviv. Old Tel Aviv, we might add, since the site of the parting is Kikar Bialik and the featured building is Tel Aviv's original city hall. Thus, the song represents simultaneously a celebration of and symbolic refounding of Israel's first city, praised in the line, Oy Tel Aviv kama hakol yafelach, O Tel Aviv, how beautiful you are. And on this old new point, I think I will close. So we'll watch a little bit of this, and then that'll be it. Here we are.
חריץ איתך כמו קייטריניה, גאצ'יניה, את לוקה, בואי נסתום לכולם את הבוקה. אם חשבת שאני מברזיל, אז נחזל שאת כל הגוף זה במוקה. יד אחת עם הכוס באוויר, לחיים סלוט, שיר, זו העיר שכדאי להכיר, ואם כבר הכרתם תתחילו לשיר. אוי תל אביב כמה הכל יפה לך, לא סתם אומרים יגע שמח לבד וראש, היום חוגגים כמו באמצע הפאבלה. אצלנו אומרים שבסדר ואצלם אומרים שטודו טודו בום, היי טודו טודו בום, היי טודו טודו בום, כל בסדר.
All right, that's enough of that. Thank you very much for coming.